Hello everybody, we're going live, it's a minute or so early for the fourth of our lockdown Q&A Sunday night sessions. I hope everyone's doing okay, and you're making the most of the sunshine when it's there. Things seem to be moving forwards, but still it looks like we may have a little way to go, so hang on in there, and hopefully you're finding ways to keep yourself occupied, and also you're finding a way to get through this. Music can be a very powerful and positive force, so I'm hoping that you're managing to play lots of guitar if that's your thing, and you're making inroads. It's a difficult thing, isn't it, where if you've not got gigs to practice for or live performances to work towards, sometimes inspiration can kind of wane. So I guess we've got to be thinking positively to playing situations when we get out of this, and maybe try and find the time to do some other stuff as well, like maybe do some recording. It's one of the reasons why I'm doing this, actually. Anyway, we've got a bunch of really interesting questions this week, really great. Thought-provoking, making me think about things in a different way, and also trying to think about things in a clearer way. Because it's one thing me doing some of this stuff, it's another thing being able to articulate what it might be. So there's going to be some hopefully cool, interesting concepts at work today we're going to look at based upon the questions I've had. Some of them are quite straightforward, some of them are quite complex, actually, or they're complex if they're new. If they're new to you, then they'll seem complex. But like most of these things, the more familiar with any concept or idea you become, the less kind of daunting it seems, and then it just becomes just something normal. There was a point when knowing that there's more than one pentatonic scale was probably something that was difficult to manage, but I'm sure you overcome that, and then you move on to the next thing and so on. So anyway, what I was going to do before we start kind of delving into the questions is there's been some requests for me to play more tunes and the like. So I'm going to start with one of my pieces, and also it means I can warm up and all that kind of fun. This is a tune called Avalanche. It was off that same album, the tune from last week. The piece last week was called Circles. Next week, I promise I'm going to play something new. The only reason why I'm not doing it this week is the tune that we've been on this week, myself and Mark. It's kind of like a ballad, and the first tune was kind of like a ballad. So I wanted to do something a little bit different. This is a really fun piece to play. It's like 4 chords. There's not a lot in it really, but there's an amazing saxophone solo from the alto player Scott Garland. It's outrageous, actually. It's out of this world. So anyway, I'm going to play it, and then we'll get stuck into the questions. I've had some questions about the piece from last week, so I'll get to that as well at one point. There's some eagle-eyed guys out there have spotted some stuff and gone, okay, what was that? And I'll talk about that as well. Okay, so here it goes. I hope the sound's okay. It would help if I put it to the start. Here it goes. harder than it seems, isn't it? Yeah, playing to a camera is much more difficult to playing to real human beings. But I've got a reasonable imagination, so I can imagine that I'm actually playing to real people. So yeah, I hope you'll indulge me playing a tune to begin with. It's good to break the ice. It's also, even at this stage in the game, I'm 51 now. I've been playing music professionally for over 30 years. Still get nervous when I play, because there's still a point where maybe it's not nerves, but more it's kind of an anxiety to do well, or some kind of a thing where you want to play as well as you can. So it's good to kind of get something tricky out the way, because now I can kind of relax into the content. So I hope you liked it. Okay, so and any questions on this, on what you've just seen, fire away. There's a couple of kind of interesting things there that I could talk about, but maybe I'll leave them for next week. They tie in with Bruno's question from last week about big intervals. There was a kind of an octave displaced phrase at the start of my solo there, which is the only thing that was a lick, other than the melody, of course. The melody is premeditated with improvisation, but there is a phrase that I play after Scott's solo that is something that's pretty much the same every time, give or take. Sometimes I reserve the right as well when playing something that's prescribed to pull the escape chord and go in a different direction if need be. Sometimes it's great to have something that's well placed and it's going to work, but in a way it's good because it gives you the confidence to not play it, for want of a better word. So if you know that you've always got a safety net of ideas that are going to work, there's a good chance that you may not even use them, but you're safe in the knowledge that you've got something there. I actually played it there deliberately because I wanted to talk about it at some stage, because it illustrates some of the things that we have mentioned in previous weeks. On an actual gig or performance, I probably wouldn't be so tied to it. I might move in different directions, but who knows? Every day is different, every performance is different. So okay, so the first thing I wanted to look at today is quite simple, but hopefully really effective. We made some inroads last week on chord-melody ideas, where we were talking about ways to voice a chord. I think, if memory serves, it was A minor 6 and A major 6. And we did something like this, where we played an A minor 6 in all the various different permutations on the top 4 strings. Quite rightly, I think Paul said it's like Kariba by Wes Montgomery, and that's exactly right. That's exactly what Wes is doing. He's connecting those together. But I think we connected them with diminished chords to create a kind of a scale. This kind of thing, to give us the option to harmonise a melody, like Summertime or something like that, so that you're not just restricted to the notes that are in the chord. And I'm hoping that that made sense and you got some mileage from that. But I'm going to give you just an alternative, 2 alternative perspectives on that idea. These are not better or worse, by the way. It doesn't make sense really to kind of have a hierarchy of concepts. I think you want to have just choice. I think that's a good thing to have when you play, so just have different possibilities. So this is just another way of looking at a similar thing. So generally speaking, when you learn about chord notes, we're often so concerned with the bottom note. But remember last time, again, another thing we looked at was how the same high note, I think we picked an A if I remember rightly, could be any one of 12 possible functions, but then, a whole, an infinite variety of different chords. So we said it could be the root of an A, it could be the third of an F, the 7th of a B flat, or the 5th of a D. What's the matter actually is a nice chord. That's a D major 7, sus4. That's not a chord shape that's often in the vocabulary of many players. And I think it's because it's sensitive to where you place that 4 going to 3. If you put it in some locations in the chord, it can sound really jarring. You've got to be really careful. There are some chords, like for example, 7 sharp 9 with the sharp 9 in the bass. It doesn't sound quite so appealing, But I'm not suggesting that it's not usable, but I don't jumping for that one. But anyway, so that's maybe another topic for another day, is how the register of a note within a voicing can have an influence upon the effect of that voicing. So it isn't just as simple as saying, play all these notes at the same time and it's going to work, because it depends upon where they are, sonically speaking. And that's, you know that for a fact. If you play C major, try it on a piano and a high octave, it sounds amazing. Play it in the lowest octave, it just sounds like you put your elbow on the piano and played random notes. So the register has a bearing on the impact. Okay, anyway, enough waffle from me. This particular idea, I'm going to just illustrate this as C major to begin with, and just nothing more complex than the C major scale, just bog standard C major scale. I'm not even going to go towards Lydian yet, but we can get there. We've got plenty of time. So the C major scale, of course. Now, what I did there, I played it on the top two strings: C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. Let's go that far. Okay. So what I'm going to suggest we do is we find a way to play something underneath that note that supports that sound. So for example, if I think the melody note is C and the harmony is C, I can play any kind of C chord that works, So I can play C6, I can play just a regular C, or a C major 7, or C major 7 sus 4, what's the matter? It's a C major 7. That one sounds too bad, either. This one doesn't sound so good though. Kind of jars, but anyway, I digress. Okay, so C major 7, or whatever you've got. So again, reserve the right to pick a different chord voicing anytime you choose. Whatever you've got, what do you know? What type of C chord do you know that's got that somewhere in the chord? In this instance, in the treble. Then we move up to the D, and then I ask myself, I'm not going to change chords here. Other than I'm changing to a new voicing, I'm not changing to a different chord. It's still a C chord, but a different choice of C chord that supports the D. So maybe I can go C major 9, or C6 9, or C added 9. Chet Atkins would do these kind of things. It all makes sense in a moment. So we could have C major 7 with the C on the top, C major 9 with the D on the top, then with an E, basic C, or C major 7, or C major 7 with a 9, inside 9, or some kind of a 6, with the 6 in it. Your choice, completely your choice. So now my point being, if my melody went, I can now harmonise this with different C chords. So maybe the speed that you wish to make the transition might be an influence. So maybe that chord is a nice choice if you've got some time. But if you're going, if the melody's going as fast as that, it might not be the perfect choice. So, which is why it's good to have options, So these are not moving through different inversions. I'm just picking a C chord of some description with C on top, C chord with D on top, C chord with E on top. Now the one exception here really is the F note, as we said with this major 7 sus 4, major sus 4. It can be seen as a tension. So we might consider this to be a chord change, perhaps like an F over C. So now I can play 4-note scale. Or pick and choose. So say my melody goes do ba bo, that could be the chord. And then we got C major 7, C. Choose your own chord, of course. C major 9, D. C major 7, E, some kind of F over C, or if you prefer, major 7 sharp 11. This is where we get to Lydian. It's a choice, either. In fact, why not both? So 1, 2, something with the 5, C major 9 in that inside shows. But you could easily choose C6 9, whatever you got, C major 7. Doesn't matter. They're all choices. So kind of 6, like major 13, then 7, or whatever voicing you got with the 7 on it. And then with the octave on top. So what I've got there is a complete C major scale or C Lydian, depending on which one I choose. Which one should I go for? That one. That's the whole scale. So if I've got a melody, I can now go. Of course, I'm using C major scale as an illustration. You should be able to do this with C dominant. Again, do you want raised or do you want? They're all C7 chords that had the notes of a C7 scale on the top, and they're all available to me for playing Chord-Melody or for comping or for if I'm playing a tune. And I want to just at some point, you know, if I'm playing wave, so whatever it might be, you know, whatever the tune is, if you know what the melody note is, and you also are aware of the harmony, and you've got a chord for every melody note, you've got a chord ready to go for anything. So this exercise, in this case, is a C major scale. These are the ones I'm choosing at this moment in time. If I come back in 5 minutes to the same subject, I might pick different ones. And on it goes. Now here's our little excuse now, F over C. That's the only exception, and then some C major 7, and then some like the thing with a fifth. And then I'm running out of space. You forgive me if I don't get this one. I got it. Right. So that was a 2-octave C major scale with a chord for each note. So, of course, it's your job now to do this with any scale. So this is kind of a challenge, really. So, you know, if you saw C altered instead of C major, we have to ask ourselves, do you know like a C altered chord? C is the root note, or C altered chord with the flat 9, or the raised 9, or the major 3rd, or the flat 5, or the raised 5, or the flat 7, or the tonic. So in that instance I just chose C altered scale. I did exactly the same thing, every one of the 7 notes in the scale as a melody note. If it so happens that that's the melody note, I've put the work in, and this is not even about talent, this is just about putting the graft in. If you put the work in, you'll know these voicings. You don't put the work in, you're not going to know them. There's no magic here. There's a reason why John Scofield sounds as good as he does, and it's because he's put this kind of work in, and he's looked at things with this attention to detail. So, you know, you wouldn't even need to ask him, you know, do you know a chord voicing with every tension there's the highest note? The answer's got to be yes. You can hear it when he plays. Okay, so that's part 1 of this. So that's like part number 1, 1A. Now 1B, of course, what I was doing here, the first part of this was to just pick any old voicing, right? So these are not moving in any kind of a sequence. This is not like I'm taking a chord and I'm moving it through its inversions. You know, like this, where every note moves along to the next note. I'm not doing anything like that at all. They're just moving from any voicing that I just happen to like. C major 7 to C6 9 to C with an inside 9 or whatever, to like something with a 5 on it. Did I miss the 4 outside? 4, forgive me, and then raise 4, and then a 5, and then a 6, and then something with the 7 on the top, and the root, and then the 9, maybe I'll pick that one, and then that sus thing again. I missed the third. 3, 4, 5, and on it goes. Okay. So they're not moving, every voice is not moving, they're moving around all over the place. You can do this with the exact same voicing moves. A very popular one, of course, I'm sure this is not by any means my idea, is to move it through something like a stack of fourths. And again, this is just doing the work. This could be a topic for another day where I could talk about it in detail, how you can use any interval, you know, it doesn't have to just be fourths, it could be like Holdsworth, like 7s and 2s and 6s all stacked together and moves down through a scale. Mick Goodrick's Advancing Guitarist is amazing for this kind of stuff, intervallic chord voicings. But if we look at fourths, say C major, if I go from the C as the highest note, I stack fourths beneath it. You get this kind of thing. And these are all diatonic fourths. I was using some of them, I think, in Avalanche. So again, this is just a question of putting the work in. So that's a C scale. So that's the diatonic fourths. And I'm sure this is not news to anyone really. If you've studied these things have been around for a while. But you know, you've got to put the work in. So you can do it with C major scale, of course. And a lot of people do that and do it on every group of 4 strings. So instead of it just being here, it's also here, it's also here, and you can move that around. 4-note voicings tend to work well on the guitar. You could do 3-note or 5-note versions of these things. It's completely up to you. Whilst you're at it, why stick with just C major scale? You know, of course, we could do with C melodic minor. You get these kind of voicings, beautiful. And this one, believe it or not, I don't know if you realised, but that's a stack of fourths in melodic minor. That's what that is. Alright, so if I go through that again, here's C melodic minor, stacks of fourths. There's an old friend, I guess. We mentioned that one a moment ago. Major dominant 7 raised 9. So imagine I'm playing minor swing or something, and I've got an E7 raised 9, and I want to treat that as if it's coming from this group of notes, which is F melodic minor scale. I've got voicings that do this. The same. That's the one. These are all E7 altereds. Most of us know that one. So this idea of moving things through the scale is a great way to get some movement in your comping, so that you're not just on a chord, you know, like C major, and you've got that happening, and then you can choose to go from there and then jump to a totally different voice and it's not connected. Again, that's another reason why it's really good to make sure that you're familiar with your drop or your drop voicings. And you can do them from the lowest possible note, you know, the lowest voice, all the way up to the highest voice, because you never know when you're going to need this, right? Or you're going to need this, right? And I want to know them all. I want them all available to me. A bit like, I guess, there's some you're going to use more than others, but it's like there's words you use more than others. Some words you use every day, you use every time you speak. There's the occasional word that you may not use for months or even years, but when it's required, when it's the right word, you're glad that it's in your vocabulary. And the same thing with these voicings, particularly if you're playing music that moves, like meaning if you're playing in certain music where it's the same each and every time, then you can be ready for what's about to happen. If you're an improviser, then how do you know what's going to happen? So you need to be ready to adjust and adapt. Even when you're playing stuff where nothing moves, like that, like playing over the backing track, I try not to, other than the lick as we mentioned, have too much kind of figured out in advance. Of course, you've got things that you know are going to work, you can draw from, but we reserve the right to change your mind at any time. So I'm hoping that makes sense, and that's thing number one, prompted from a question from John. So thanks for that, mate. And we'll keep coming to this. So Chord-Melody, just the question of Chord-Melody, it's something that we could come to on a weekly basis with a different idea. So as I say, just to be clear, I'm not suggesting that this replaces or is better or worse than anything else. It's just another way of looking at things. I think I got that first idea from Don Mock, watching some Don Mock video when I was a teenager. He's amazing. You know, he's one of those players who should be better known than he is, but players who know, if that makes sense. So players who know, they all know who Don Mock is. He's incredible, and he's very, very clear. One thing about Don, and I think that's been an influence, probably more than his playing, if that makes sense, is the fact that he presents things in such a clear, logical, and methodical way. So you're not left in any doubt. You're never going to scratch your head when you see something from Don going, I don't know where I'd use that or what that's for. It's very applicable and usually razor sharp in terms of delivery. Okay, so let's move on to the next thing, if I can. So I'm seeing some messages on the screen. Once again, my caveat for this is I can't see them. I can see that they're there, but I can't read them. Because, again, John, who asked about Chord-Melody, informed me in week 1 you could see me, but you couldn't see the guitar. So I've got my computer, or my laptop, whatever you call it, iPad, so far away that you can see the guitar, but I can't see any of the messages. So I will read them this week, and they will form the basis of the questions for next week, hopefully. Okay, so let's crack on. So the next thing I wanted to look at is a question. I had a great conversation with my mate Mickey this week, and he was talking about like ways to access all 12 tones. Right now, there's loads of ways of accessing all 12 notes. You know, being able to use all the chromatic notes. Some of them simple, some of them not so simple, or some of them, let's maybe not say not so simple. We could say some of them are personalised to the player. Like some players have got a very particular way of doing things that immediately sounds like them. Some things are more maybe generic, should we say, you know, they're more common. So everything I'm going to do here is going to be A Dorian. And I'm going to show you, hopefully, a way of playing every note, but in a maybe a way you might not have seen before. And again, I could spend this week and maybe the next dozen weeks just looking at the idea of chromaticism. I've got loads of different approaches. Some of them stolen from other players, brazenly stolen from other players. And some of them just from thinking about stuff and trying to find a way that, trying to find interesting ways of doing these things that again, you know, it's pointless to claim that it's original or whatever, because as soon as I say that, I'm going to stumble across the fact that someone else was seeing it like this years and years ago. But, okay, so A Dorian, as we know, is the notes of a G major scale, but never perceived from G, because G is no longer the root, A is the root. So we hear this as root, second, flat third, fourth, fifth, sixth, flat 7, octave, and the 7 notes in that scale. So here's the simple way of seeing this, or a simple way of seeing this, is that if we know what the 7 notes are that are in the scale, we also need to consider what the 5 notes are that are not in the scale. That's what they are, actually. They're a minor pentatonic scale, a half step above. That's all 5. You know, that's the flat 2, major 7, flat 6, flat 5, major 3rd, and away we go. So that's all the missing notes are found from playing a minor pentatonic, a semitone above. That's why Oz Noy's thing of moving up a semitone, Herbie Hancock's thing of moving up a semitone sounds so cool, because it's all of the missing notes. But we can bring them in one by one, so this is a simple way. So I can play A Dorian, and I'll pick them one by one. I'm going to try this over a little backing. Excuse me for 1 second, it's locked, time me out. There we go. So, loopy backing, very simple. I hope you can hear that. So what I've done is, that's A minor 7, A minor 6, so there's no doubt that it's A Dorian. So the flat 2 sounds like this. Now of course if you know how to resolve it, it sounds great, I think, if you go. As well. Okay, but a common way is to see that as the connection between the two neighbouring notes. So there's 5 gaps. There's a gap between the root and the 7. There's a gap between the 6 and the 5. There's a gap between the 5 and the 4. There's a gap between the 4 and the flat 3. And then there's a gap between the 2 and the 1. So for any 7-note scale, you've got 5 8-note scales where you add one of the notes. So maybe you put the flat 2 in. So that's what Dorian sounds like with a flat 2. And this is like a lot of bebop lines do this. Here's what it sounds like with a major 3rd. That sound so slowly will be like walking bass lines might do that, you know. And then with the flat 5, well, you know the flat 5 from the blues. Okay, flat 6. Scale, and then major 7. Oh, and again, sorry. And that's a lot of kind of classic jazz lines are based on that. So I'm introducing this as being like kind of a conventional way of looking at chromaticism. So hopefully then that's one way of accessing all 12 tones. They're all available. Them all. That was definitely them all, but you get the idea. And I seem to be playing descending lines at the minute. They work just as well going the other way. Here's another way of looking at the same idea, right? So instead of seeing it just as a thing by itself and going B natural, B flat, A, sorry, brain, B flat A, you know, which is kind of conventional way of playing. One way of doing this is to see the B flat as being part of a different structure. So the B flat belongs to something else. Now, the more notes in the structure that are in the tonality, because there's more, we make it part of another chord. Right? So we say a triad. If there's 3 notes in that triad and 2 of them are in the same group of notes, this is going to work pretty well. So, one thing that we can do, we can imagine A minor. Going to G minor. Why? Because the B flat note prominent note in G minor, so I'm imagining in my mind a shift to G minor, and that's what's going to allow me to access that flat 2. It's one way of accessing the flat 2. Rather than it just being a note by itself. That's a little bit more kind of, I guess it's a little bit more outside, but it's, you know, still hear that as consonant. You're deliberately using the tension and then resolving it. So imagine a move to G minor and then a move away. So let's pick a different note this time. So imagine we're after the major 3rd. The major third, it's going to be the worst note, yeah. So what I can imagine that is being the 5th degree of an F sharp minor. So this is it, outside, this is inside. So I've selected an option for each of these 5 notes that doesn't belong in the scale, but could be part of another structure, and we imagine the chord change. So there's the flat 2 dealt with, there's the major third dealt with, the flat 5. We can just see that as being A minor with a flat 5, and we get that kind of, and it's a cool sound. But what about if I see it as being the minor third of a C minor? Different perspective on that, the sound of that note. The only note that's not in that scale is the flat 5, the E flat. The C major, of course, you could even go play inside. C major, C minor, goes over to A minor. I'm hoping this makes sense. So instead of just seeing it as a note by itself and going, which is cool, yeah. That was a whole C minor phrase. I'm thinking C minor going to A minor. What else we got? Oh, so we could, for the flat 6. D minor. And you might argue that F note clashes against the F sharp, to which I would say, good, bring it on. That's the whole point. That's why we're doing this. We're doing this to create a sense of tension and release. And if these things sound tense, that's the purpose. That's what this is for. And then we have the major 7. Now, the conventional way to bring the major 7 into a minor tonality, as you may be aware of, is to play a 5-chord dominant. So, like Coltrane, where he goes. That kind of thing. E7. And that's cool. Again, E7 has the interesting properties of 3 notes, or 4 notes if it's a 7, of which 3 belong in the key. The only difference is G to G sharp. The next tier of these kind of thinking from different keys, and this is what Brecker was talking about when he's got options coming from every note of all 12 degrees against any chord, is to think about sounds where, of the 3 notes, say it's a triad, 2 of them don't belong in the tonality. So for example, like E is great to bring in that G sharp. do those kind of things. I like this one. I like to then maybe bring in something like C sharp minor. And that has the beautiful properties of having two notes. If we play just a C sharp minor triad. Two of those notes are not in the key. You've got the major third and the major seven. You've got this happening where it goes. So it's surrounding two very prominent chord tones from a semitone above and a semitone below. So it's got a contrary motion rub, and that works great. You know, and again, you know, the caveat to this, of course, is you've got to kind of know when this is appropriate. If you're playing some kind of funk fusion gig or whatever, then go for it. Fill your boots. Perhaps on a pop session or a function gig or whatever, playing, Mr. Brightside or something. Maybe that's not the choice to go for. Not that you get to take a solo, Mr. Brightside, but you take my point. You got to sort of know when these things work or when they're appropriate and when they fit in with the music. If you're playing with the Brecker brothers, then sure, go crazy with all of this stuff. Again, I think I mentioned him last week. Michael Brecker is one of those guys who really knew when to do this and when not. When he played with Paul Simon and Dire Straits, could play really inside and make it sound amazing. But then, when playing his own music or when he's playing with Pat Metheny or someone like that, then sure, he's going to throw the kitchen sink at it. He's going to really stretch the possibilities of how far you can go with harmony. So hopefully that's thing number two. That's a different approach or a different way to think about chromaticism. I'm doing this minor here. Of course, you should do this with major. You should do this with dominant. You could, if you're into Pat Martino's way of thinking, save yourself all the work and just minorize those things. And what that is, you don't think major as major, you think of it as minor from a different perspective, from a different interval. Kind of like we touched upon, I think, where we mentioned chords like E half diminished, or is it? It could be G minor, 6 and the arpeggio. It's the same in both instances. It's the same notes. So you could be playing G minor stuff over E half diminished, and then all this stuff works. So maybe again, just due to time and trying to remain some kind of focus. I know I'm jumping about a lot. These could be potential topics for further exploration, and I'm hoping that over a period of time that we end up with a collection of these videos and we can cross-refer them. So I'm trying not to repeat myself, although some repetition is inevitable and positive really, because it reinforces learning to go over things. But even better so if you can do it from a slightly different angle, because then you end up with more of a three-dimensional way of seeing a topic, I guess. Okay, so I'm going to move on to 3 of 5. I've got 5 topics, see how we get on. Maybe I might get through 4 of them actually. So this next one from Sean, he sent me a question about delaying resolutions and not using the root note. Like how can you sort of stay away from the root? And again, I'll give you a simple and I'll give you a complex way of doing this. Or it's not complex, but more involved, more cerebral way of doing this. The tune Purple Haze is a good example of this, right? So it goes between what we might call open and closed phrases. So in E, he kind of goes, and that's not the root, yeah, is it? That's the 4 that we're in E, or E7 sharp 9, the chord of the day, and then he goes, and then it is the root. So that, we know that isn't finished. But this could be. That could be finished. And then again, that's not finished, that's a question or a statement. Okay, that's kind of the answer to it. That's definitely not finished. I should be ashamed of myself, I got the riff to Purple Haze wrong. Again, not the root. concludes to the root. So, and that's not an accident that that's working in that way. So Hendrix, of course, is phrasing in some respects where he knows the root is going to work. And another time. And it's open. It's definitely not the root there. Now it is, and the phrase is closed. So what we can do is we can be really selective as to what we play. And there, again, there's tiers to this. So I'll do this over whatever chord I recorded earlier. I forgot what key it's in. I think it's an A. Yeah, it's an A, yeah. Okay. So this is like an A major. With a sharp 11. Kind of carry on, yeah, which is Lydian, and there's some of the phrases I think I talked about last week. Bigger intervals, you know, and they sound cool. Joe Diorio's your man for that. And it's become kind of a popular sound. So the scale, of course, is it's the fourth mode of an E major scale, but it doesn't pay to see it that way. It's easier to go to A major scale with sharp 4. So we get. So the trick to this is not lumping them all into one bracket or one pattern. What you've got to try to do is jump into the middle of the pool and just pick maybe one note. So I'll pick the major 7. I'm not going to make an amazing melody with just major 7. You could play rhythms, I guess. But if I couple that maybe with another note, I'll pick the major 7 and the sharp 11. So how cool that sounds. We're avoiding the root, we're avoiding the resolution to the root. So we're just being really selective as to what notes we play. So maybe I'll add major 3rd there in that case. So now I've got this kind of like open sound, which comes from actually really playing one thing against another. So you could argue that's G sharp if we're in A, G sharp sus 4. But whatever it is, I mean that came about by accident really. Whatever it is, the point of this is that it doesn't. We're not containing a root, because we can go for more open sound. Between the two, you know, one's more inside, even though they're the right notes. One's more kind of connected to the chord, one's not. And so we can kind of just pick notes that we like, and just imagine improvising with less tools. If you like, you know, kids, you give them a xylophone and you just give them less. They don't have the whole scale. They've only got 3 or 4 of them. So rather than having every note, you just pick a couple and then improvise. Try and make music with that. So they're 3-note things. Of course we could do 4-note things, you know, pick various 7th chords or what have you. A nice thing to do is select pentatonics that come from the key that don't contain the root. So for example, if I play, there's 3 minor pentatonics that come from A Lydian. A Lydian coming from E. This is one instance where this probably helps you. So the 3 minor pentatonics in the key of E are where the 3 minor chords are in the key of E. So that's F sharp minor, G sharp minor, and C sharp minor. And what you find, if you take the time and trouble to stack them up against this, right? So if I play the F sharp Of course, that gives me A major. It's quite inside sounding. But if you play the other two, so for example C sharp minor, it neatly skips the root. It goes 7, 2, 3, 5, 6. Or Steve Vai's favourite one, G sharp minor, which replaces the 5 with the sharp 11. So if you've got kind of a vocabulary of these kind of options available to you, then not resolving to the root is a piece of cake. You just pick something that doesn't contain a root. That sounds simple. Or you pick intervals that don't contain a root. Now, of course, from a 7-note scale, if I just avoid the root, you might think, oh, that's a faff, just trying to avoid the root. Well, in this instance, we get lucky. This scale from C sharp is a commonly used scale anyway. It's like the minor pentatonic with the added second. Some people call it a hexatonic. So there we've got kind of hopefully a stack of different options of things that you could play against one sound. Maybe we can come back to this. This might be something interesting for next week. Is okay, so that's all very well and good, like over a static chord, like the idea of playing with resolutions. But of course, resolutions could be back to the first thing we looked at, you know, mine and go. Now, on the face of it, that is pretty horrible, yeah? But if I go and play with conviction, what's wrong with that, you know? It sounds completely in, although it's out, if that makes sense. Because there's a sort of a, it's like, you know where I'm going with this, it's like, stick with me, that's the idea. You know, when sometimes you find great storytellers, you know, like, you know, I'm going to show my age here, but when Ronnie Corbett used to tell us long, winding jokes, and he'd go off topic and make it look like it was improvised, but it wasn't, it was all meticulously planned out. But you go with him because you know this is gonna come back to where we started from, and you follow it, as opposed to, you know, someone just rambling about nothing. Then very often you lose, you know, the audience or the listener or the recipient will just lose interest. And in a way, it's kind of like, to have a good sense of being able to play stuff that's outside, you really have to begin by having a great sense of what's inside. It's like a bit like if you've got a great sense of balance, you can kind of put yourself off balance because you can come back, you know, these like circus performers and the like, you can go really, really off balance and then return to stability, whereas someone like me, I'd fall over, you know. And the same deal, you know, if you've got a good sense of where the good notes are or the good resolutions are, that allows you to use these other tensions with impunity, really. You can really, like, play whatever you want, you know. And a lot of the time, it is a question of intent. I think if you play these things with intention, you know, you can make it work. You know, I've heard B.B. King play major licks over minor chords and make them sound brilliant, you know, and they were killer. And when you analyse them, you go, that shouldn't work. But because it's played with such confidence and conviction, it definitely works. But anyway, but hopefully there's some rhyme and reason here to this, and I'm hoping this is making sense to you. So there's two things that I've got left on the list. One of them is a bit of a big topic, and I'm aware of the fact that, just as we mentioned in rambling, I want to give this its due attention. So So Brendan and Matt both asked about diminished patterns, about the diminished scale. I'll give you a little taster, right? So I'm just going to give you a little introduction, right, with diminished. And I'm going to give you the clues, and then have a think about this, and we'll return to this next week, and then I just want to talk about one last thing. We have to ask yourself, when you see diminished chords in a piece of music, what are they really doing? And most of the time, they're not actually diminished chords, they're substitutes for dominant sevens. Like all the stuff we looked at last time, E7 to A minor, and E7 to A minor, but we substitute the 7 voice in with a diminished. And that happens a lot of the time, when you see these things that go, that kind of thing. It's not actually really a diminished, and that's the same if it's Yngwie Malmsteen or if it's Joe Pass. Right? So where do you actually see diminished functioning as diminished? Right? At what point? Right? And very often they're kind of hidden. Right? And usually it's when you go from a 1 chord, right? So 1 chord of A major, to the parallel diminished 7th. And that could be 1 minor or 1 major. So you might now be thinking, okay, that's all very well and good. Where does it do that in music? Where do you see it do that in music? Because very often what it does is disguised. What you'll see it as is, say, 4, 4 minor, 3, flat 3 diminished, 2, 5, 1, like all the things you are in this game. Or Donna Lee, where it goes. Those kind of things. What's actually happening there, you might know that chord in Donna Lee is a B diminished and the tune is in A flat. Well, B diminished is A flat. Likewise, in All the Things You Are, which is in A flat. Okay, C minor is A flat major, that's what that is. And then when you go to C flat diminished or B diminished, I guess you call it, that's A flat diminished. So what's actually happening in both those instances, it happens in so many tunes, even in blues tunes when you go. That's what that is. First inversion 1, so first inversion 1, 1 diminished. So when you hear guys go, that's what's actually happening. It's 1, 1 diminished. But it's frequently disguised. What was the tune I was playing the other day? Bouncing with Bud. It just got this thing that goes from a G minor to a D flat diminished. Well, guess what D flat diminished is? G minor. Okay. So the first thing I would suggest you do, get used to going from 1 major scale to 1 diminished scale. There's a great video, if you can check it out on YouTube, with Peter Bernstein talking about, and he wagers, and I think he's right, that chord is actually Stella by Starlight, really is 1 diminished to 1, and over the years it's become this 2-5 conundrum, and we all play those changes, but it's functioning as 1 diminished, 1 major. And this is what you see in lots of these turnarounds, but very often disguised as like a 3 to flat 3 diminished. But anyway, so there's that. That's the first thing. And then I would say, do your homework, right? And that is, if you've got, say, an A diminished scale, because it's such a linear scale, it lends itself to this kind of playing. And it just sucks. It sounds like a scale. When it starts to sound fun, when you start jumping around and playing big intervallic leaps. So there I played groups of 4s, I think, and then do that triadic stuff. So on. So put the time in to find the triads and the intervals, and it's great to practice it in 6. Stack 6 are quite easy. Okay, so this is the thing I was going to show you. Right, one of the keys to using diminished scale successfully is to see its connection to melodic minor scale. Right. So if we look at a jazz melodic minor, in fact, if I'm saying melodic minor, it's always melodic minor. Right? Jazz melodic minor, meaning it goes up and down the same way. Whilst I'm aware of the application of the classical melodic minor, you know, for Verheyen and so on, and you hear it in tunes like Beautiful Love, you know, where it goes. The melody sort of goes up, it's sort of in D minor. It goes up with a major sixth, a major seven, and comes down with a minor seven and minor six. So it is used, but as an improvisation tool or something that we can use to create a harmony. The fact that it's two different scales, essentially, or a family of ideas, makes it kind of a little bit tricky. So in jazz, we generally use the same, or at least there's an argument to knowing it in that way. So what happens is there's a huge chain of symmetry, of two chains of symmetry in the melodic minor scale. Okay, the first one is this. So it goes tone, semitone, then it goes from here, tone, 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 tone. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 tone steps. So from the major third, from the minor third, sorry, again, what am I? The sun has gone to my head. From the minor third all the way up to the major 7, you've got a whole tone scale. In fact, I did something in my first tune where I was playing over, I'll do it in this key, where I played this using Lydian dominants, of like a D, coming from A melodic minor, and then I ended up going some whole tone thing. So that's a way into whole tone scale. There's only actually one note in the scale, in the whole tone scale, that's not present. So what we do is if we take the 1 and the 2 out, and replace it with a flat 2. But that's what we end up with. We end up with it. And that kind of sounds like E7 as well, like E7 going to A minor. So there's a whole tone connection. You might think, okay, you've changed subject again, but I'll come back to it. Okay, so let's look at the step pattern again. I'm going to go in 2 octaves this time. Whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step. Okay. Whole step, half step, whole step, half step, whole step. Recognise that one? Whole half. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 notes of a 7-note scale, which are the diminished scale. There's only 7 notes in melodic minor, 6 of which are the diminished scale. So all I need to do here is take this 5 and surround it with a flat 5 and a raised 5. So instead of that's how guys like Mike Stern can be playing over A minor 7. So the next thing they're playing a diminished phrase, you think, hang on a minute, wasn't he playing over a minor chord 2 seconds ago? And he was. That's something that I think, just as by way of a little hint into what we're going to look at next time, which is finding ways to make it sound melodic rather than pattern based, is to see its connection to things like melodic minor blues or something like that, you know. And that's very often where you hear the guys who all play with miles use it, because they're not really so much playing it over function and diminished chords that often, really. Although I think it's nice to know that, because if you want to play standards where you see that 4, 4 minor, 3, flat 3 diminished, that's your way, and that's where you're going to need to be able to play the real diminished scale, not this half-whole permutation of it. So I'm hoping that that is just like a little introduction to that idea. Now I'm going to keep this short because I'm aware of the fact that we're already slightly over time. But one of the things that I wanted to mention, or that was picked up, Andy sent me a message about the tune Circles that I played last week, was in the melody. He noticed that at some point I did something where I went there, and there, and there, right? So there's 3 points in that melody line, where instead of going, which would sound one-dimensional, where I'm playing a cascading, kind of a cascading effect. And it comes from playing country guitar. I'm trying to learn some country guitar things, but then twisting them to find my own aim. So I've got kind of an interesting take on this. So let's imagine we start with, say, A major scale, and I'm going to play it here. Right? So the idea being is I'm going to play between A and A, and conventionally, of course, we play in position. I'm putting the G sharp there, just so that I can play those notes against one another. Okay. So traditionally, you'd fret all the notes. In this instance, whenever I see an E note or a B note, I'm going to play an open E or B string. So we're going to have A, G sharp, F sharp, E, got it, yeah? D, C sharp, B, A. And this is how you get this real ringing. This ringing effect, right? So I learned this kind of stuff, studying some country guitar, but coming at this from jazz, where you can play anything in every key, and you want to make things work on every harmonic possibility. It felt really restrictive to me, because it was like, okay, there's a lick in A, but what if it's in B flat? Okay, well, that doesn't work so well because the open strings don't work, so on and so forth. So I got to working with the things that I knew to see if I could find other applications for them. So the obvious ones would be A major, could also give me E7, because A major is E7, they're the same thing, they come from the same place. All I have to do there is maybe pick some better notes to begin and end on. So instead of A, which would make it an E sus4, I maybe begin on B, like so. Before we did a little bit of work on A Lydian. Could I make it A Lydian? Well, what's the difference? It's a D sharp rather than a D. So long as it's not an open string, it's movable. So there's A Lydian, playing with open string scale. So if Steve Vai got into playing country, he might play A Lydian, something like that. Yeah? Okay. So then we can twist this in many different ways. So we could go say it was A7, not A major 7. You could go, there's a Mixolydian there. Of course, it could be Lydian flat 7 if you wanted it to be. And then A7 gives you D major, so that could work over D major. So you go, if you wanted to go, I'll play Breezing with country open string scales. It's available to you. I mean, I'm joking really, but you get the idea. So this scale that originally was A, and that's all it was, is now E7, but it's also A Lydian, which is now E major 7, and on it goes. Okay. So then you can start doing interesting things like, say it was a Mixolydian. We make it into a Dorian. Or a melodic minor. A G sharp altered perhaps. Or a harmonic minor. over E7, back to this chord again. So if I'm playing minor swing or something like that, that's one of my kind of non-country licks, if that makes sense. So it came from looking at the way country guys would. And I question, what about if I made it? So Yngwie Malmsteen got into country playing. And he's looking for a Phrygian dominant scale. There it is, you know. And how many times, if you're playing something like gypsy jazz, do you play over E7? And the answer to that's quite a lot. And I've seen it with my own eyes when I got to play with guys like Paulus Schäfer and Mozes Rosenberg. When you play that kind of stuff, they pay attention, because it's not normally in that vocabulary. There's no one that I can think of, not very many players, who are doing that kind of thing. That said and done, you know, I've watched some video of the chap from Intervals, is it? And he was playing these open string scales on a Serre guitar through an Axe effects. And it sounded incredible, you know, it sounds really, really amazing. So my point being is, I could have just studied, you know, country guitar and just played licks that already exist. And I'm sure, you know, I'm not suggesting that country players haven't played these kind of things before. But by twisting them to find your own applications for these things, you can find stuff that's far removed from where you started, from the start point, and you can hopefully use them in different ways. So I'm hoping that this kind of idea of flexibility and permutations and just continuing to work with stuff, taking stuff that you already know and seeing how can you progress to the next level, if you like, or the next permutation. How can you find that variation, if you like, theme and variation? That's a huge part of my practice, taking stuff that I know. Or if I learn anything that started life as anyone else's idea, then I'm going to try and find a way to reinterpret it, do it in a slightly different way, and hopefully come up with something that's unique in the process, you know, or at least interesting, you know. And of course, you know, this is why it's great to keep coming back to the same topic in different ways, because each time you come back to it with fresh eyes, and hopefully you'll find something new. So apologies for not getting too deeply into the diminished stuff. We will return to this. I'm hoping that there's something there you can pick through the bones of this and find at least one idea. You know, if you spent an hour and a little bit more than an hour and a quarter, what have you, looking at this, and you've come out with maybe one or two things to work on, then that's a reasonable investment of time, I think. You'll find, just my passing thought just as we end, that the more you play your instrument, the less surprised you are by it. So these kind of eureka moments become fewer and further between. So that can be the point where, going back to where we started, right at the very start, where inspiration can lull, because you know you're not getting that kind of boost that you get when you play a new instrument. I've just got hold of an upright bass thing, this thing here, which I've wanted to shot. Oh, there you go, electric upright. And I'm practicing this every day, and every single day I practice for like an hour, and I'm twice as good as I was the previous day, and I'm figuring out things, or I'm seeing things like every single time. If I go past the room it's in, I'll go in and play for 10 minutes and I figure something new out. That doesn't happen to me on the guitar. But that said and done, when it does happen, it's really valuable and it's an important thing. Or if it does happen, it's often something that's much smaller. It's more refinement of something that I already know, rather than like brand new information completely, you know, that totally changes the way you look at the instrument, which is what's happening to me at the moment on double bass, coming at it from electric bass. But at some stage I'm also aware of the fact that that'll stop happening, and that's when maybe some people lose interest. But that's really where we should be pushing harder, I guess, and digging a little bit deeper. So I'll leave you with that kind of to ponder over, and please keep the questions coming. Yeah, I'm feeling the love. It's great. This is really working for me as well. there's a lot in this for me, because I have to really think about how I'm going to deliver these things, think about what examples typify an approach, hopefully clearly. If anything's unclear, then let me know, and I'll see if I can maybe backtrack a bit. It could be something that should happen before. That's what happens with learning. You can't skip levels. If something's not going in, it might be that there's a missing piece of the puzzle, you know. And maybe it's my job then to give you that piece of the puzzle. But stay safe. Get out into the sunshine if it's not thundering and lightning like it was last night. Take care of yourself, and hopefully we might get out of this, and I can see some of you guys on gigs and the like face to face. Okay, take care of yourself, and see you later on. Thank you. Bye bye.